Throughout the development of Final Fantasy IX, the various creators involved wanted the game to serve as something of a love letter to everything that had come before. But there was also a sense that, due to the success of Final Fantasy VII and VIII, Final Fantasy had just become a bit of an unwieldy behemoth, with literally hundreds of people now involved in the creative process. It was a far cry from the olden days, when a small, tight-knit team would work together to create games on the Famicom and Super Famicom, and senior figures like Hironobu Sakaguchi and Hiroyuki Ito wanted the creation of Final Fantasy IX to invoke the spirit of those earlier days. This became represented as a theme of returning to our roots, and such was its prevalence that it was also used as a narrative theme for characters like Vivi and Kuja, who would try to explore what it meant to be human, while characters like Garnet would explore what it was like to live a different kind of life. Within the final product, each of these notions became quite clear. Through numerous aspects of design, we got to be reminded of what had come before, and this came in the form of the more literal manifestation of specific job classes, like Vivi appearing as the quintessential black mage, or through very clear and obvious allusions, like the appearance of Cloud's Buster Sword in a shop in Limblum. Final Fantasy IX also featured a more eclectic creative cast, with Ito serving as director and Sakaguchi taking a more active role in the crafting of the story, something that had not really happened since Final Fantasy VI, a game where Ito also served as co-director. They were joined by Kazuhiko Aoki, who had been at the company since 1985 and had worked on Final Fantasy III, IV and VII, as well as other veterans like Hideo Minaba, Kazuko Shibuya and Hirokatsu Sasaki. Each brought their unique experiences to the table, and it led to the creation of a game that was both fantastical and vibrant in terms of looks and personality. Lots of more nuanced themes and connections were also formed, some of which related to the intense backstory revolving around the Terran assimilation of Gaia, and one of the most interesting is the odd and chilling similarities that exist between one of the main protagonists and one of the main antagonists. Much has often been made about the connection that exists between Zidane and Kuja, as well, some of the parallels on display are quite clear. They were both Terran genomes created by Garland, and they were both intended to be angels of death, designed to assist with the completion of Garland's scheme. But outside of that, their backgrounds and life experiences couldn't have been more different. Based on the prominence of these two characters, little attention is placed on the similarities that exist between Kuja and Garnet, as on the surface, there is seemingly no connection that exists between the two. They come from very different worlds, have very different upbringings, and have almost no interaction with each other, aside from small segments of the story where they appear on opposite sides. Kuja also appears to be a masochistic individual who thrives on chaos and cares little for the sanctity of human life, whereas Garnet is a compassionate monarch who cares deeply about not just the people who reside within her kingdom, but also those who she meets along the way. What we saw of their character personalities at the start of the game, and indeed throughout much of Final Fantasy IX, were the result of years of moulding. Each of them had a long journey to endure that drove them to become who they are, but if you strip away some of the paint and look a bit deeper, it becomes clear that Kuja and Garnet aren't all that dissimilar, both in terms of what they represent, but also how they had been treated throughout much of their lives. Upon encountering Garnet at the start of Final Fantasy IX, what we saw was a bold, courageous princess who was desperate to be the architect of change. She wanted to be in control of her own destiny. And after she learnt the truth about her lineage, we saw this in a more literal sense, as by summoning Alexander, Garnet used the power she housed within her as a means to defend what she held dear, without having to rely on someone else like Zidane or Steiner. By the end of the game, we learn that Kuja was desperate to achieve the same thing, control of his own destiny. After Garland realised Kuja didn't have strong enough emotional development to unleash the power that he housed within, something that would prevent him from fulfilling his task, Kuja was discarded and replaced. But he wasn't free. In spite of his disappointment, Garland still attempted to use Kuja for other, lesser schemes, and should he not do what was required, he knew there was the possibility of a swift rebuttal. As such, Kuja sought a power strong enough so that he could seek revenge and subsequently free himself from Garland's grasp. And just like Garnet, in the end, Kuja used a power deep within, in this case the power of trance, something that allowed him to take control of his own destiny and fight against the life he had led up until that point. What's interesting is that these actions and traits caused Garnet and Kuja to become rather intertwined. While on the path to seek the ultimate power, Kuja subjected Garnet to the same fate that he was trying so desperately to escape, as after learning about the raw power possessed by Eidolons, Kuja hatched a plan to try and acquire said power, with Garnet, a young girl from Alexandria, becoming the unfortunate subject. Queen Bran, who had become a widow a few years prior, was identified as an easy mark, and through the use of various manipulations, Kuja seduced her into helping him acquire powerful stones that it was believed would allow for the summoning of Alexander. It caused Bran to turn from being a loving and devoted mother into a maniacal dictator who cared about nothing but domination and conquest. And after realizing that it was no longer safe at Alexandria Castle, Garnet decided to stow away with the Tantalus Theatre Group. They were due to perform in honour of her 16th birthday, and it would provide the perfect cover. Unbeknownst to Garnet, Cid Fabul IX, her uncle from Limblum, also had the same idea, and it led to a comical exchange when Tantalus realised their kidnapping target was actually a willing participant. Queen Bran was furious at the disappearance of her daughter, but not because she had any real concern for her well-being. They needed her, so that they could extract an immense power that was housed within, Eidolons. And after the Eidolons were eventually extracted, Bran ended up viewing Garnet the same way that Garland had viewed Kuja many years before, as a useless vessel that no longer served any real purpose. Much like Kuja, Garnet sought to confront the individual who had discarded her, but the main difference was that due to her emotional development, Garnet did not do so for the purpose of revenge. She just wanted to understand. She wanted to understand how the woman who took her in and cared for her after the disappearance of her real parents, acting as a parental figure for so long, would abandon her in such an extreme fashion. Kuja, on the other hand, who saw Garland as his parental figure, perhaps felt the same, but he just didn't have the emotional development to rationalize it and chose to lash out instead. In spite of their differing growth, one interesting connection that does exist relates to how and where the pair ended up being raised. Both Kuja and Garnet were strangers in a foreign land, Kuja as a Terran who was living on Gaia, and Garnet as a summoner who, after escaping Madain Sari and having her mother Sarah perish in the escape, was adopted by the Alexandrian royal family due to her close resemblance of the daughter they had just lost. The same could also be said about Zidane and Aiko, who also have an interesting parallel in this regard, but the main difference is that even though they all had extra appendages, Kuja and Garnet chose or were forced to hide theirs, whereas Zidane and Aiko did not. The Terran genomes had tails, and in order to blend in, Kuja hid his tail through the use of clothing, only revealing it at the end of the game when he finally felt comfortable with who he was. Summoners traditionally had horns, and Aiko displayed hers proudly, but with the royal family wanting to avoid any suspicion about Garnet being their real daughter, they chose to have Garnet's horn removed. Another interesting parallel relates to their powers. We noted earlier that both used their powers in order to control their destiny, but in the initial sense, neither even knew the extent of the powers they possessed. Even though Garnet was theoretically able to use Eidolons from a young age, as shown by Aiko, she did not have enough MP in order to be effective as a summoner, unless players did a lot of grinding of course. But after turning 16, the Eidolons could be extracted and used by a third party. Bran then used these Eidolons to decimate Clayrat and Limblum, with Kuja enslaving Bahamut, and it was only after the Eidolons were extracted that Garnet truly understood and was able to use Eidolons properly, with a greater range of Eidolons becoming available, each with reduced MP cost. Garnet, with the help of Aiko, was also able to bring forth the ultimate Eidolon, Alexander. Kuja suffered through something similar. The power of trance was always housed within, but it wasn't until he witnessed Mog entering into a trance state and then subsequently researched how this was possible that he began to understand how to wield such a power by using his own body as a vessel. And after travelling to Terra to confront his master, he used that power to enact revenge, catching Garland by complete surprise and causing considerable destruction. The final, rather interesting note is that they both share a connection with Zidane, and not just in the obvious sense of acting as a partner or sibling. As the narrative develops, it's clear that Zidane has a positive impact on both of them. Through his actions, both Garnet and Kuja end up growing as individuals. It sees Garnet learn to be less regal as she modifies her speech and becomes more open-minded. Kuja too opens his mind after seeing the way Zidane reacts, and even though it ended up being his final act, this led to Kuja doing something selfless as he saved the party from annihilation following their defeat of Necron. Looking back, it's easy to say that had Kuja been raised by a more loving parental figure than Garland, he would have turned out much different. But from the start, everything was stacked against him in almost every regard. Having been created as an adult and dropped into Gaian civilization, he wasn't able to develop proper emotions and acted no different from a child in many instances. But what's interesting is that even though this particular aspect is quite different from Garnet, the fact that they were both taken and introduced into a new civilization at a young age, both had to hide their true heritage, and both housed a power deep within that they didn't understand, only to have a similar narrative device used in order to unlock it, is pretty amazing. And I don't know about you, but after studying these two characters in a rather abnormal way, I just find it all rather fascinating, and it just serves as yet another example of how rich the storylines are within the realm of Final Fantasy. It's at this point that I'd like to take a moment to thank Reigning Eckham for suggesting this video. They proposed that we create an analysis video about Final Fantasy IX, and we thought, you know what, let's do something a little crazy. We hope you all found it very interesting, and if you did, then please hit that like button, share this video around, and if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to our channel. Alright guys, this is Daryl signing out. I'd like to extend a big thank you to all of our Patreon and YouTube membership supporters, especially Reigning Eckham, Logan Nijay, Benjamin Snow and Gregory, who are super special Onion Knight supporters, and of course, a big thank you to everyone for watching this video. I'll see you all again soon for more Final Fantasy goodness.